All right. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you. Great to see y'all. Great to be here. My name is Mike Osterling. I met Eric. I live in San Diego. I'm a manufacturing guy. I've been a manufacturing guy for years. And Eric, I think we met in a seedy little bar in Ocean Beach, if I'm not, or else that was your evil twin brother. I'm not sure, but like I said, I'm a manufacturing guy. I worked for a company called Square D Company for most of 20 years. Square D is a big manufacturer of electrical distribution equipment. There's a good chance that if you go back from these lights through the switches and back to the transformers and all of that stuff, there's some Square D product out there. Having worked for them for 20 years, I've been an independent consultant for about the last dozen years or so. And it was in the mid-90s when one of the business unit VPs came out to the facility that I worked at in the San Diego area and said, and he is from Kentucky, so he had this funny accent, and he said something along the lines of, "Y'all ever heard of the Toyota production system?" And our translator told us that what Carl had said was asked if we knew what the Toyota production system was. And we talked to him for a little while, and I'd been exposed to some of that stuff. We were actually doing Kanbans in the plant and things like that, and we didn't really understand it was this big holistic system. So we'd been doing some bits and pieces. We'd been exposed to some of that stuff. We knew what a Toyota was, and we knew who Toyota was. And we went out on a field trip. There were about a half dozen of us, and we started looking at things that were happening and that companies were doing by applying some of these concepts. And it was one field trip, and I was hooked. My life was changed, and my wife still shakes her head. She doesn't understand all this stuff. She does. She's born with it, actually. But I was hooked, and I was lucky enough to end up in a position where for the following 6 years I was leading our local operations as far as our lean transformation. I'll say the West Coast operations. At that point in time, there were 30-some Square D facilities. There were a couple of us, and just a couple of us, that really dug into this stuff. The facility that I was working at was a high volume, actually part of the business was a very high volume operation, build to stock, making circuit breakers, and it just lent itself. It was a natural fit. And we had a whole lot of fun out in the shop floor, and we did a whole bunch of stuff for the next year or so. And finally, we realized we brought lead times, and this was classic transformation. We brought lead times down from 3 or 4 days to 15 minutes. I mean, this is really good stuff. We doubled our output on the shop floor and things like that. But what was really interesting was we're a year into it. We started realizing these improvements out in the shop floor, and we started learning that, especially on the custom stuff, on the build-to-order stuff, it didn't matter if we could turn stuff in an hour or two if it took 3 or 4 weeks to get the information out to the shop floor, or 3 or 4 days to get the stuff out to the shop floor. Or we'd have a Kaizen event, we'd go change things out in the shop floor, and it would take 2 months to get the procedures changed. We're trying to get standard work in place, and the support systems, the backup folks, or the backup processes, it wasn't the people, it was the processes that we had designed, just hadn't been focused on. We hadn't been working on this. And the more we played around in these different areas, the more we realized that it's true what they say, 70 to 80% of the opportunities for improvement in manufacturing companies, or I'll say in product and service companies, aren't in the actual delivery of the product or service, it's in the support areas. And so we started digging into that. And I'm gonna say since the late 90s, probably 60, 70%, maybe even a little more of what we've been doing has been off the shop floor. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's a lot different. So actually, show of hands, and there's roughly 100 of you in the room, so I think by these questions I should end up with a total of about 100 hands. I'm gonna continue Eric's stretching exercise and just get a feel for who we've got in the room. So just from a lean perspective and what lean is and all of that, how many of the folks here have, I'll say, less than 1 year of exposure or experience with lean? And please, eventually, if we get everybody's hands up, this will help me a lot. Okay, great. 1 to 5 years, show of hands. Okay, greater than 5 years. Okay, good. There's a really good distribution. There's a fair number of you with limited experience, a whole bunch of you in that 1 to 5 year range, and there's about the same number of folks over 5 that were less than 1. So that means I'm going to try to be everything for everybody. Good luck in an hour and a half. Same type of questions from a Kaizen event, because that's what this workshop's about. A workshop with 100 people, that's a challenge in itself. But Kaizen events. Who here has no idea what a Kaizen event is? Okay, all right, thank you, because I'm going to quiz you guys later on, so be honest. All right, who here has been on a Kaizen event team? Okay, who here has done Kaizen events or participated in Kaizen events in an office or an administrative type process? Okay, and who here has facilitated Kaizen events? All right, okay, so actually a pretty experienced group in here. So what I'm going to do, I've got a bunch of slides. There's handouts on the tables. Help yourselves to them. I've been using the same printer for years and years and years, and I have fantastic confidence in them. And I got underprinted. So there's only 65 of these out here. Eric's making another 30 or so. There's about 100 of you guys all together. So if you don't reach fast enough, you don't get one of these, there will be more coming, hopefully by the end of the presentation. So what do we want to do here? Let's see. Put on my old man glasses. All right. So the name of this session is White Collar Kaizen. This is doing Kaizen events in administrative and service and office type environments. I was lucky enough about 6 years ago where a woman that I've been doing done a bunch of projects and client support activities with, a woman named Karen Martin, said, Mike, we've both been doing Kaizen events in the office for years. You've done a whole bunch in manufacturing. There's very little stuff out there that explains how to do these things. At times we felt like we were kind of winging it, if you will. We feel like we've been very successful at it, but we said, shouldn't there be standard work for executing Kaizen events, especially in an office environment? And so, of course, I said, yes, there should be. I'm a lean guy, so there should be standard work for this. And so what we did, we spent several years putting together what we thought were some best practices, and we were lucky enough to actually go ahead and put together a book called the Kaizen Event Planner, which was designed, it's achieving rapid improvement for office service and technical environments. So there's some stuff in my presentation that we've pulled out of that book, and it was published in 2007, and I'll say we've learned a whole lot since then, and I've integrated a lot of those learnings into what we're going to try to accomplish this morning. So what are we going to talk about this morning? We're going to talk about how Kaizen events are relevant in administrative environments, but how they need to be managed a bit differently. Going to talk briefly about different stages. This is a pretty mature group. I've got about 3 or 4 different breakouts, so I'm going to try to keep as much time as possible for breakouts, whether it's small pairs, 2-3 people, or whether it's table-size breakouts. Going to talk a little bit about some of the tools, but since this is an advanced group, I'm going to skim over those things. The way that I typically operate is there's a fair amount of stuff in here. I know what death by PowerPoint is. I'm not going to read every slide. I'm not going to stare at the screen. I'm going to touch this stuff. It might not be in the same sequence as it is here. If you need sleeping aids, perhaps this will help you tonight, all right? But that's there as my intent is not to cover every single slide. That's a resource for you to look back at and remember what it was that we were talking about. So we're going to talk about some of the tools, but I'm not going to teach you all the tools. This isn't about the tools. This is about running Kaizen events. And we're going to talk about some different things that we can do to help your team's ability to achieve or sustain results. I'm a big believer that lean really isn't just a bunch of tools. Lean is 3 different things. It's a philosophy, it's how we think, it's how we behave, it's how we run the business. It's an operating system, it's how we design our processes, and it's a management system. It's how we develop people, it's how we solve problems. So lean is not just a bunch of tools. It can encompass the way that we operate our business. It's not just a manufacturing thing. Definitely its origins, or most of its origins, come out of that type of environment. But all one has to do is go out and Google and play on the internet and we get a good recognition or good appreciation for how broad this lean net is as far as application. It's not the same in every environment. I've been doing a lot of stuff in lean construction on buildings like this, and the way that we run and the way that we apply the tools when we're building commercial structures and things like that is completely different than if we're putting together widgets or if we're putting together circuit breakers or transformers or cars or something like that. But it's interesting because it seems like every conversation we get into, people say, yeah, well, this lean stuff sounds good and all of that, but, well, when I started back in the mid-90s with this stuff, the story was, we don't make cars. I know, but we're making circuit breakers. It's just about the same, ain't it? Yeah, but. And then we started doing it in the office because we were successful doing it with circuit breakers and transformers and electrical equipment. We started doing it in the office, and people said, yeah, but we don't make widgets. It's like, yeah, I know, but let's play around. Let's have some fun. Let's see what we can do. Let's look at the process. Let's try to understand what's going on. And we get out. I did a bunch of work in the oil industry with Chevron over in Bakersfield. I think there's a handful of folks from SDI here, right? Is SDI? Yeah, okay. So that's the SDI table. So we did a bunch of stuff over there, and was it the same? No. Are the principles and the concepts the same? Yes. So bunch of different industries. There's some resources for you. It's fun to see what's going on. It was fun to hear Eric pull the crowd and say, how many people are here from government? How many people from healthcare? How many people from construction, manufacturing, and such? So most of us have read Lean Thinking. If we haven't read Lean Thinking, I hope we've seen these 5 different principles, and they talk about defining value from the external customer's perspective. We talk about identifying and understanding our value streams. What is it that's important to the customers, and how do we deliver that value to the customers? Try to create flow, put in place pull, and continuous improvement in pursuit of perfection. And so just as a quick reminder, I'm not going to dwell on this stuff, but as a quick reminder, this whole, what's the value proposition? What's the purpose of what we're doing? And that's got to be defined by the external customer. So value-add activities are defined by the external customer. And then we get into these non-value-add activities, and then necessary non-value-add stuff might be regulatory in nature, or it may be things that are necessary to do in order to run the business. Okay, manufacturing environment, I get an order, I better put it somewhere so it can be distributed to folks. Because if it just sits in here, it doesn't do any good. Customer doesn't care what all these transactions are that we got to do, but we got to do something to communicate it. All right, we've got to do stuff to stay in business, whether it's in compliance with the laws or to run the business effectively. And unnecessary is all that other stuff that, it's weird with this unnecessary non-value add stuff. We get into the conversations and people say, well, can you describe it? Can you give me an example? Well, there's hundreds of examples, but describing it, it's like, if we ask people why we do it, and the only answer we can get is, well, because we've always done it that way, because the procedure says so, and that's as good as we can do, that's a good hint that there might be some unnecessary non-value add activities out there. We've got the 8 different ways from an office environment. Ask you guys, from an office environment, are these all equally relevant? They're all relevant, but equally relevant. I'm not sure that's, when you start getting into these silly conversations about what's inventory in an office environment, it's like, yeah, we can make up some stuff, or we can stretch and try to come up with some description of what inventory is in an office environment. I've put in bold, it's a little tough to see here, but in my opinion, there's about 4 different of these wastes that are really relevant in an office environment. If we look at waiting, overprocessing, errors and defects, and underutilized people, I think those are the big 4. I'm not saying the other 4 are irrelevant, but I think the bigger opportunities or the things that we see more often than not are those 4. Waiting, overprocessing, errors and defects, and underutilized people. So the question is, how do we attack that stuff? And there's different ways, and we've been, you can go back to, was it in the 80s when we started talking about the white space and all of the and business process reengineering and, a whole bunch of different things. There's a whole bunch of different approaches that we can use when we want to go after this stuff. So Here's one
When
approach.
we asked Reebok to send us Terry Tate, some people thought we were crazy. But I'm a firm believer in paradigm breaking, outside-the-box thinking.
Hey, buddy.
Break was over 15 minutes ago, Mitch!
And since Terry's been with us, our productivity has gone up 46%. We're getting more from our employees than ever before.
You know you need a cover sheet on your TPS reports, Richard! That ain't new, baby!
Hey, Terry.
Hey, Janice!
But what's really impressed me is how Terry's become part of the Felcher family.
Yeah, baby!
He fits right in here.
That's a long-distance call, Doug!
To be honest, I wish Reebok sent us 10 Terry Tates.
You wanna play game, Sheen? Well, when it's game time, it's pay time, baby! Woo!
So there's different ways that we can go about improving our business processes, and some are more effective than others. Some have immediate impact, but it might be temporary. And when we start looking at what the different foundational things are, the Toyota production system and lean, I mean, a big one is respect for people. Now, people maybe have respect for Terry Tate, but it's a different type of respect than what we're talking about when we hear respect for people. So, Kaizen events, actually I'll say this whole journey, this whole transformation is made up of a bunch of things. And this is an eye chart, and I'm not going to go over all of this stuff, but the concept or the idea is there's foundational stuff, and these are those principles that we talked about already. What's important to the customer? What's the process when we want to transform that? I want one of these until they've got it, and where are the non-value add or the wasteful activities inside there? How can we improve the process? And if we're doing this stuff right and we're engaging the folks, we can get a motivated workforce. When we've got these foundations in place, then we can start, and I'm going to say it's a little bit iterative, but when we've got these things in place, then perhaps we can start applying the different tools. And I'm going to say the tools are in the middle here. So those are tools, whether it's pull systems and co-location, standard work and visual management and stuff like that. And this other stuff down below is these foundational things are kind of the way that we think or the philosophy of how we get there. So Kaizen events are just one tool. It's not the only tool. It's not the only way that we improve processes, but we can achieve a bunch of number of different things. We'll talk about that later by utilizing Kaizen events. So the word Kaizen, of course, it's translated a bunch of different ways. I don't speak Japanese, but the best I've got is to break apart and study if you really look at the root of the words, or to change and make better. And we talk about daily Kaizen, which is if you really look at the essence and the true translation of the word, Kaizen is small, continuous improvements. It's little things. And a whole bunch of little things, of course, can have big compounded impact or effect. Okay? Kaizen events are very different than Kaizen. Kaizen events are probably closer to the word kaikaku than they are Kaizen, but as Western society, America, we've got to redefine everything, right? So we take this word that means one thing and we do something completely different with it, and that's unfortunate, but that's where we are. Kaizen events are big, major redesigns of a process. But they're done in a different format, if you will. So it's not a bunch of small changes over a long period of time. It's formal, it's facilitated, it's pulling people together for a short period of time, doing, I'll say, a deep dive on a process or a chunk of a process and seeing what we can do to make it better. So one definition, 2 to 5 day. Actually, I've done half day and I've done 6 day, but we'll stick with this. A 2 to 5 day focused improvement activity during which a sequestered cross-functional team designs and fully implements, and this is really important, they fully implement those improvements to a defined process or work area, generating rapid improvements, rapid results, and learned behavior. So I'm engaged with a lot of different clients. I see a lot of different operations. I'm exposed to a lot of different stuff, which is, I love my job for those reasons. But it's interesting when you go into organizations and they start describing how they do Kaizen events, and people will say, yeah, we meet 2 hours a week. And, we're doing a Kaizen on this process, and we meet every Monday for 2 hours. That's not a Kaizen. That's the way we've been trying to improve processes for decades or 100 years or something like that. And we all know the challenges that we end up with when we approach problem solving or process improvement in that methodology. The problem is we show up for the 2 hours and people give all their excuses and reasons and all of that for why they didn't get done what they signed up for the previous week. And X% of the people aren't there because they've got a conflict or they're on vacation or whatever it might be, or they forgot about it. And what do we end up doing? We end up reassigning and talking about the problems that we had and reassigning action items and all of that. That's not a Kaizen event. Talk about tools that we use out in the shop floor and are they relevant in the office? Well, if we're doing that, we're doing this new setup every week. It's a mental setup. Where are we at? And it just doesn't work. So true Kaizen events, if you want to maximize the effectiveness of these things, sequester jury, back-to-back days, and implementation at the end. Implementation at the end, not a plan. Implementation at the end. So, quick implementation. Scope is narrow and deep. We're not trying to fix this whole thing from beginning to end. We're saying, let's just grab this chunk of it, and we'll talk about this, okay? And we're not trying to fix all orders that come in. We're taking a certain subset of the orders that come in, or whatever that is. We're doing engineering change notices. Hey, we're not doing all engineering change notices. We're doing this type of engineering change notices, because not all engineering change notices go through the same process. We're talking about a new hire process. Not all new hires are the same. Doing a contract worker, I'm doing a temporary worker, I'm doing an hourly, I'm doing a salaried exempt, salaried non-exempt, I'm doing an executive. Probably 5 or 6 different processes. So if we're trying to improve the new hire process, grab the subset. And even then, we may not be looking at it from beginning to end. We might just be looking at it from, what we're looking at is from when the hiring manager identifies the need until HR or whoever puts out the first notification or puts out the first posting. Maybe we're just looking at that front end. Or maybe we're just looking at the interviewing and selection process or something like that. We're not trying to fix this whole thing end to end. If we can go narrow and deep, then we can get down to the detail level and really understand the work that's being done or not being done, that should be getting done or that could be getting done. We can get into the details, and that's what we need to do in these events. So I think one of the biggest powers and benefits of running these Kaizen events is actually getting into people development. Because what we're trying to do is help people understand how they can get closer and closer to this daily Kaizen thing. We shouldn't have to do formally facilitated events with a mass of people in a room for 2 days or 3 days to improve a process. That's not what continuous improvement is. These events are a great development tool. Help people understand what it is that we're trying to do, what the different tools are, and we learn best by application, right? As a trainer, as a facilitator, as a consultant, one of the most depressing statistics that's out there is you guys will retain about, and all of us, I'm not pointing my fingers at you, I'm in the you guys thing. We retain something like what, 10% of what we hear? And that's really, so you're here for 100 minutes with me. So that means if I'm lucky, if I was just talking at you, you'd remember maybe 10 minutes of what I told you over the next hour and a half. That's pretty depressing. But now, if we see stuff, then that improves it. Okay, so if we see and we hear, it gets up to 20 or 30%. And if we actually do some hands-on stuff, some of the studies out there say we retain something like 60 or 70% of what we actually do. That's good. And that's what Kaizen events are about. They're not training. Well, yes, they are. They're training through doing and learning through doing. So we learn what the process is, we understand, we get to apply some of the tools, and we actually go out and we run experiments. We see if what our hypothesis is actually sticks, if it holds water. And that builds up our confidence, it builds up our understanding, And maybe it brings down some of those barriers that people start changing their conversations and start looking at processes on a day-to-day basis. So, oh yeah, in addition to employee development, yeah, maybe we're going to improve customer service, reduce costs, improve quality. Is quality a relevant, quality, shop floor. We've got all kinds of labels and acronyms and things like that. First pass yield, defect rates, parts per million, things like that. And what are those, what's the name for our quality statistics or whatever you want to call it for an office process? We have first pass yield. Does anybody here in their organization talk about first pass yield in the office? Is it relevant? Is there even a label for it? Does anybody here, show of hands. There actually is one label out there that I've come across 10 years ago or something like that. Bo Keat. You mentioned Bo last night. So there's actually a metric called percent complete and accurate, which is a great, it's really interesting. We'll talk about it a little more later on. But percent complete and accurate is saying, hey, I'm in HR, I'm getting these new hire requisitions, so when I get it, what percent of the time am I getting everything that I'm supposed to get? I did a bunch of work with HVAC, heating, ventilating, air conditioning contractors. So HVAC in buildings like this, air conditioning systems. So it's the company that designs the systems, they generate the drawings, the detailed drawings for these systems. They send the drawings, bill of materials, whatever the different documents are, cut sheets and things like that, out to the shop. So anything that they're going to prefab in the shop, they use those documents. And then additional documents together with the materials, the ducting, the systems, the piping, the copper, whatever it is, goes out to the field for installation. And we start asking the guys in the field, and you start asking the guys in the shop, what percent of the time when you get a documentation package, does it have all the information that it's supposed to have? The information's correct, and it doesn't require clarification. And it's a really sobering number. Anybody want to take a guess? Zero. 0% of the time did they get a documentation package that was complete, or it was accurate, complete and accurate, and did not require clarification. So we start, my earlier comment about 70 or 80% of the opportunity being off the shop floor, being in either front office or back office, and that's where we start seeing where those opportunities are. Because what's the cost to the customer? I don't care if it's a service organization, I don't care if it's a product organization. What's the cost to the customer, internal or external, for rework, for having to go back and say, hey, I don't have the numbers. Give me the data. I don't know what kind of person you want me to hire. I don't know what kind of metal you want me to cut. I don't know what kind of connectors I'm supposed to be using, or whatever it may be. Does this ring true to anybody? Is this relevant in your own organization? So, the interesting thing is, in the early days, we had all of our emphasis was on direct labor, in fact, in manufacturing, and what we learned was we need to shift that to our overhead, again, to our front office or back office operations, because this is equally true. There was an article that was put out by Harvard Business Review, which I think is great reading. I forget what year it was. It was in the 90s, in the mid-90s. It's called Staple Yourself to an Order. And it starts saying, be the thing. Instead of being the widget, which is what we do out on the shop floor, we follow the parts or whatever it might be. But hey, if you got an order coming in, or a purchase rec, or you've got this new hire requisition, follow that thing and experience it. Don't get stuck in these little silos. Let's follow this thing through. And, what does this look like? I mean, this is from an RFQ to a PO. It's ugly. And when we really look at the opportunities and the issues, it's the back office stuff that's taken 60 to 80% of our time and our labor, if you will. And that means 60 to 80% of the opportunities for error and mistakes may reside in this area. It's not as much the value add stuff. Yeah, if we see some opportunities over here to improve, great, but in reality, most organizations have been looking at this stuff for years. So I'm going to show you, it's about 10 minutes of a video called Breakthrough Kaizen Events, put out by SME. And what I'd like you to do, we're going to do a short breakout after this. I want you guys to think about what this video talks about is how this one organization, Landtech, back in Kentucky, has used Kaizen events to have big impact on their operations, and it's out in the shop floor. But I want you to think about what are the things, what are the enablers that are in place that permit or that enable these events to be so effective. So, did anybody catch how many different Kaizen events they'd run in this area? Something like 40 different events over the years in that area. That's the definition of continuous improvement. Okay? I'm not going to say all 40 of those events were focused specifically on those process steps that these guys were looking at, because they weren't looking at the whole line. They were looking at several workstations in there. So, but the fact that they're constantly going back and saying, how was the work done? What are the issues that we're having? Did you guys catch why they were doing this Kaizen event? 10% of what we hear. Customer demand was going up. They had a promotion that was on the books. They had a promotion scheduled. And so as a proactive activity, they said, what are we going to do to make sure we can handle the demand, the new demand level or anticipated demand level of the customer? So what I'd like you guys to do is just take 5 minutes at your table and talk about, give me just a second here. Just talk about what are the different enablers that were in place or that they described in here for successful Kaizen events. So take notes, be prepared to share with the class. I'm going to hold you guys to an honest 5 minutes because we got not a lot of time to do a lot of stuff. Beautiful. And one of the things, and by the way, this is an edited version of that video, of the whole video. The gentleman who is talking, his name is Bob Lane. He's a president of Landtech. So, I mean, this is the level of support that they're getting in that organization. So, do the job normal. It's not about doing the other stuff faster. It's about trying to figure out what's unnecessary and being able to stop doing that. What do you guys have over there? Thank you, Chester. Very specific goals. It's not about, they don't say we want to improve productivity, because you could improve productivity by 0.5%, and the team would say, hey, we improved productivity. And then the management comes back and says, but you didn't improve it enough. Hey, clear, specific goals. Good pickup. Table over here.
We took a look at the human factors
Okay.
portion of it and getting the operator buy-in. What's important, like they mentioned, is having management buy-in, but also having the operator buy-in.
Good.
You want to make those improvements, but if they don't have the operator, the person who's actually doing the work, buying into these changes, then it's kind of worthless.
So I'm going to open this up, or you guys specifically, if you want. How do they get that buy-in?
Well, I think clearly they had a sensitivity and a consciousness of the human factors change management required to achieve their goals. And they were applying that at every level of the organization as they were proceeding. And they were conscious of the fact that they were observing their folks, dealing with it as people, not just as a production improvement.
Good. And who is observing the people?
Their peers.
Their peers. A lot of them, most of them, what we try to do is we'll say 70, 80% of the team should be the people it's the frontline workers. It's the people that do the job on a day-to-day basis. It's not supervisors, managers, and engineers making up stuff. This is the people that are closest, that really understand what's going on. Good. Do you guys have anything on the people, on the leadership, communication, motivation side?
We had down measure the improvement and communicating that back into the process.
Good.
Letting folks see the change was good.
Good. And communicating back to the folks. How about this table over here? Don't want to skip anybody, you know.
They planned out everything before they did it. They took time to plan, so that way when they got into that 3 to 5 day period, they were ready to go.
And that was interesting. And that's a big point of departure. For this one, they talked about planning it out 2 weeks ahead of time. And it's interesting because if you look at the process they're looking at from a silo perspective, how many different departments had to agree that, yeah, let's go in and look at manufacturing, let's look at this assembly operation and see if we can make it better. How many different departments are really involved in that? Are there many? Production, maybe quality, maybe like manufacturing engineering, but hopefully that's within the production group. Now start thinking about changing an administrative process, and most, not all, but most of our administrative processes go over a whole bunch of silos. For the manufacturing folks, if you think about an engineering change notice, so we're going to change a drawing. What are some of the different departments that are involved in changing a document or affected? Start calling them off, guys. Planning, quality, purchasing, engineering, production, maybe a different type of manufacturing engineering. You get up to 5, 6, 7, 8 different silos or departments, and if we don't do it right, each one of those is a potential point of veto. And trust me, if we don't do it right after the event, one of those departments will just say, nope, we're not going to do it. So A3 thinking's been getting a lot of press the last 3, 4, 5 years, right? And what's the first thing that we need to do with A3 thinking? Build consensus that there's even a problem. And so that's what we need to do in these highly cross-functional processes is we need to start, it's not 2 weeks ahead of time, trust me guys. It's at least 4 weeks ahead of time. We need to be out there talking to the different department heads or managers or whoever the right people are in those different silos and get consensus and get agreement that there's even a problem. So front half of the room, resources, man, machine, materials. What are some of the enablers? This table here, the Zodiac table. You guys got anything?
Yeah.
Good.
So we thought it was very important to have a cross-functional team in doing Kaizen events, so incorporating all the key players, day-to-day operators in the area, that's being focused on, the engineers that work there, supervisors, just to have different perspectives when we're working on a Kaizen event.
Good, good. One thing they didn't talk about in here was outside eyes. That's another really good element to have on these teams. People that know nothing about the process. How about over here?
And management presentation at the end is motivation to finish the project on time.
Good, yeah. Motivation to get it done on time and motivation to have some impact. I think, did I skip you guys? I didn't mean to make you feel bad. You guys got anything on resources side? Did you get over there? Or on the other side, motivation and management?
They implemented the change right away.
Beautiful. That was big. And I mean, from a motivation perspective, it's like, this isn't just a silly act. This is showing people in the front, hey, we're serious about this stuff. And we're going to be going out, we're actually going to change it. And the team has permission to make those changes. What do you guys got?
2 things we came up with. The fact that they were all sequestered, they took the time out to put them
Good.
all aside and dedicate that time. And then another thing we mentioned was after they made their initial round of improvements, they went back and looked for further improvements, like obviously continuous improvement, but it was nice to, you make these changes, there might be ramifications for those changes, but then observe, okay, how did those changes impact, the intended process?
Beautiful.
Building on the planning and implementation that, they had the maintenance team ready to do the changes. There was only 2-hour downtime for the production line, so it wasn't the 5 to 7 man team, it was the other resources that were ready and planned for.
Good. So you got technical support or heavy lifting or whatever it might be, and those folks are lined up. What do you guys got? They got it all. Oh, I should have started at the front to make it tough on the back, huh? Anything to add on?
We had training, that they
Training.
provided training.
Good, good. And so lots of times we'll do that training. We'll do some formal orientation, if you will, or training ahead of time, and it's not just for the folks on the team, it's for the folks in the area that are going to be affected by the changes, so they know what's coming down the pipeline. I wanted to add something to what you guys said over here, and you're talking about They tried things and they went through a couple different iterations. Near the end, when the woman was up there showing that template with a guy that was helping her put it in place, did you guys catch how they tested that? Cardboard. So what? That's a little bit different than the way that we would normally go about implementing a change. I don't care if it's cardboard for a template or if it's systems, an IT system or something like that. What do we usually do? We're all in. And we just assume this thing's going to work. We come up, so with a template, the cardboard, what would we normally do? Old school thinking. An engineer would come up with a template. They'd make a design. If they didn't have it, they'd make a drawing. And then what would happen with that drawing? Review it, redline it. Where would it go then? If you didn't have in-house capabilities, go out to quote. If you don't have in-house capabilities, go out to quote, maybe quote 2 or 3 different places, right? Does this sound familiar? And then the thing comes back, okay, so we get a quote, then we go to the lowest guy, right? And then the template comes back, and if it's a little off, what happens? Well, you either start all over, which would be wonderful if they actually started all over, but usually what happens is you guys figure out how to make do with that. This took way too much time and energy. And what's my lead time on that, by the way? Weeks. How long do you think it took them to make that cardboard template? Yeah, 5-10 minutes. When do we learn? We actually learn when we try to do something. You guys are not going to learn anything today. Another depressing comment from your facilitator. Okay? I might change your belief and I might motivate you to try something, but you might believe it, but you haven't learned if it was true or not until you actually go out and try to do it. So I got this great idea on this template. I cut it out with cardboard. Does it work? And actually, if you look at that, really, I've seen this video way too many times, but if you look at that template really close, it's got a rectangle for where the label goes, and then it's got a little cutout like that for your finger. And I wouldn't be surprised if the first time they put it together, it was just a rectangle. And somebody said, ooh, let's tweak that. That's pretty cool stuff. I lead a boring life. So, works great in manufacturing, but since half or 2/3 of the people in this room aren't in an environment where they're making widgets, is this stuff even relevant in the office? So I already told you, yeah, it is, but it's going to be different. It really is. So again, I want you guys to break up in your tables and talk about how our administrative or office processes different. When we're looking at process improvement and changing things, I'd like you guys to think about how are office processes different than, I'll say, product environments or where we're making widgets. I'm really making you think now. I didn't give you the answers in a video. So I'm going to keep this short, but just see what we can come up with in 5 minutes here. All right. Front of the room, you guys get the easy assignment. Give me one.
We said the first one we came up with was evolution of waste in an office environment. So, sometimes you have a process that, existed and then some condition arose that you had to change that process and add a step. And over time, these steps keep growing, and rarely do people go back and say, do we still really need all those steps? People just keep following that process because that's what it is.
So that's beautiful. So those great examples, approvals, reports. I've done a fair amount of work with the Navy since I live in San Diego. We had one where we had 22 approvals on a document. And you thought your tax dollars weren't hard at work, huh? Okay, and so stuff gets added on, and it's easy to add on, and it's really hard to take off, isn't it? That's a classic. We've always done it that way. You guys got any example here?
One of the challenges we were talking about was that the improvement is really in the electronic elements and the processes that aren't physical. So it's more difficult to not only identify where the waste is, but also implement it. Instead of a maintenance team, you're now relying on an IT team to make the implementation possible.
Well, we've got SWAT IT teams out there doing program changing like that, right? These are all things, really, this is a good one. These are all things that we need to keep in mind when we're setting up our teams for success. Later on, we're going to be talking, not too much later, but later on we're going to be talking about putting together a charter before the event. And one of the things that we do is we actually say, what are the boundaries? What does the team not have permission to change? And so we'll tell the team, hey, you're using the existing IT system, and if you're in the operations, you're in the sales operations group or whatever it might be, and you've got some IT expertise in there, we're going to say minor coding changes only, but no IT requests. If it's something they can do right away, lots of times we'll have an IT person on the team because it's actually interesting what happens with information systems and applications and such is people will say, well, the system won't let us do that. Well, maybe it does and we just don't know how. And so if we get a subject matter expert on that application on the team, more often than not they'll say, yes, it will, and here's how we do it. Or it's real simple. There's a field out there that we can start using. So that's a great one.
There's more variability in the product. When you're manufacturing a product very clearly defined, and sometimes in an office environment, it's not as clearly defined, and there may be more variables involved. So forcing that definition and even categorizing or breaking it into segments if you can.
Right. And I think I heard you guys talking about product families. You know, how do you define a product family in an office environment? In the factory, hey, I'm making one of these, or I'm making, a different one that's this big. This is a remote control. We make these remotes, we make TV remotes, different product families. In an office, what are my different product families? And it's really, and even within those product families, it can be like a job shop. It can, because everything is different. Every new hire, should it be different? Maybe some of them should probably go through the same process steps, but maybe some of the activities within some of the process steps are different. So that's good. More like a job shop. Hope I'm not putting words in your mouth. Over here.
We're more subject to human volatility. So in your example about, should every document be treated the same, politics could be involved, and your customers might have specific idiosyncrasies that require a particular worker to treat something differently than another.
So again, almost going back to that job shop type environment, not everything is going to look like this because different customers have different requirements.
If I might add, I think that in office environments there are a lot of exceptions. When you're thinking through a process, there are a lot of exceptions, a lot of little exceptions. What if somebody's not there during a workflow process? Somebody needs to approve this, but then there are a lot of little exceptions. So that can really complicate the process.
And I'm with you, there are, and I guess one of the challenges to a team would be, does there have to be that many different exceptions? Why are there so many exceptions? Thank you. No standard work. And should there be standard work for some of this stuff? I'm not saying that in a creative process, we're designing a product. I'm not saying that there's even a way that you can standardize how I think through and design something, or that I can put in place standard work for a salesperson going out and negotiating a contract. I'm not suggesting that. But if we start looking at all of the stuff around that, maybe there's some other stuff that could be or should be standardized. Good. It's getting tougher as it goes to the back. You guys can start sweating now. What do you got? Anything? Anything to add?
We talked about cycle times and the fact that they're very difficult to see in information, and just mainly about measurement and the fact that very, very difficult to measure anything to even begin to think about improving something.
Right. So Very rarely will you see us go, the Kaizen team, out into an office with a stopwatch or something like that. But actually, I'm going to say that's okay, because it's not about process time. It's typically not about process time. It's about, why does it take 3 weeks to get this new hire rec from the hiring manager to get posted? Why does it take 3 weeks? So now we just get into the whole definitions of time. How many, let's see, we got 70, 80, 90 people in the room. I'll bet you we could come up with at least 20 or 30 different definitions for what is cycle time. Lead time, cycle times, process times. So work content versus turnaround time. So lots of times we'll talk about that work content as being process time. I call it process time, just to try to minimize. Typically, you'll talk about turnaround time as lead time. In the real lean world and learning to see and books like that, cycle time is actually an output frequency, but I won't go down that path. But this is good. What are these different definitions? Do we even have consistent labels or definitions for these labels? You guys got anything to add?
One of them I think that hasn't been mentioned is workflow. Normally in a manufacturing floor, you have a value stream. Here with this process, you could have an office over here, up on the second floor, and
Right.
so you gotta kind of try to.
So the physical flow of work is very fractured. Great. Good one. Doesn't have to be always. Got anything to add?
Similar to what they were saying, is like the visual process. I mean, in a manufacturing floor, you can physically see the product going down the line if you already have it defined. But like, if you take a work order, for instance, you don't know how many exceptions or how many processes it takes to actually get to the manufacturing floor.
Good. So it's harder to see the different steps. Just the physical, tactile nature of the thing. Nowadays, it's electronic. Lots of times you don't even have a physical thing to touch. And so it's really hard to follow it. One of the things we were talking about with one of the other tables was the hidden waste. It's really hard to put 2 covers on this thing. It's really, really difficult. But it's really easy to input the same information 3 or 4 or 5 different times. Or it's really easy to add those signatures on, so I get 22 signatures. Anything to add?
I think Andrew said it's hard to sell improvement to management on the administrative side.
Why?
It's hard to measure.
It's hard to measure. That's a big one. And we're so silo organized and measured by silos that who's responsible for the whole value stream? Who's responsible from beginning to end?
So one thing, basically all the groups are talking about is it's easy to spot out the parts on the manufacturing floor, that inventory. The inventory in the office is really the information, and so it becomes hard to see that process as a whole, like what everybody's talking about. And so it's easy to do all those hidden waste, like the overproduction, because it's like we talk about our stress engineers need information, but the design engineers are working on the wrong stuff because they don't have that link, because they are in silos at some point, and it's hard for people to see that.
So in a manufacturing environment, we go out there and we count stuff, right? How do we measure inventory on a value stream map? Time. So it's the same unit of measure in an administrative process, right? It's time. Whatever we call that, cycle time, lead time, turnaround time, whatever that is, it's all about time. Anything to add? Anything to add? Nada.
I thought there was more commonality than difference between the two.
Good.
There were some differences. Another one, obviously, the ones that were mentioned is the rate of output can change greatly. On a manufacturing floor, it's 50 units a day. In an office environment, there may be whatever comes in that day, and that can be very different from day to day depending on the department.
So if I would agree with what you're saying, but 10 years ago I might not have. And that's what we need to do, is help people make that transformation to recognize that there is more in common than not. It's kind of like, hey, I know we're not making cars, we're making transformers. I know we're in the oil field, it's not widgets. It's different, but there's a lot in common. So we can have big impact, whether it's on process time or lead time or percent complete and accurate. This was the Navy one that, I didn't say that. This was a military installation, okay? And we were looking at this. This was a 3-day event. This was pretty cool. We had a quality officer was in there as well as people from the planning and engineering group. This was how long it took to turn around from assessment of a piece of equipment that came in until they had a work package that said this is what has to be overhauled on it. And when the team started out, they had something like 27 days to put together. 27 days was typical to put together a package. And at the end of the event, in 3 days, we did it Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. On Monday morning, they were running with a 2-day turnaround time. And on Monday morning, even though they had Big Navy and Pentagon and legal and all of this stuff, all of these legal requirements that said we need 20, I said 22, I'm sorry, that said they needed 20 signatures. What we found out, and it was great because we had the quality officer in the room and we projected the regs up on the wall. And because before that, everybody was saying, you can't take away these signatures, they're required by law. I was like, okay, and we were prepared for this. And we had a lot of conversations going into it. But on the days of the event, we had the regs available on a laptop, projected them up there and say, let's figure out what it really says. And how much of this stuff was just layered in over time. And what they found out was of those 20 signatures, only 4 of them were really required. And we saw the same thing with touch time, process time, whatever we want to call it. We went from something like 46 hours down to 5 hours. This is 3 days. This is in an institution that's got, 250 years of culture? It wasn't easy, but they got there. And actually, we did a 6-month follow-up to see where were they at. And instead of being at 2 days, they actually had metrics on all of these controlled work packages, all these CWPs, they call them, and they were at 1.5 days. 6 months later, it stuck. It was a lot of work making sure that everybody understood that there was a problem, but we did that before the event. And as a result, it enabled the team to be successful. So when we look at pulling together events, there's stuff we got to do before, during, and after. I'm going to pretty much wrap up here with talking about the charter, because this is setting the team up for success. I know it's an eye chart. If you actually go to the back of the handout, I believe the second to last page, if not the last page, is actually a bigger version of the charter. There's a blank one as well as an example of one, this one here, filled out. And so if we kind of look at this charter as the left third, the center third, and the right third, the left third is what's really important. And on the left third, again, this is what we're starting to pull together 4 or 5, maybe even 6 weeks ahead of time. That's what we did down at the Navy. 6 weeks ahead of time, we started having these conversations. And we said, what are we going to be looking at? So actually, I'm going to go back and I'll talk through using this as an example. So this was a controlled work package. And the process was just about anything that goes into the Navy maintenance yard that comes off of a boat, just about anything that goes in there that's going to be overhauled needs to have a work package so the guys in the shops understand what to do. So this command's called SWARMAC. There's something like 72 different shops on the base. There's a lot of stuff going on. This one specifically that I showed you earlier was for overhauling these, what they call accommodation ladders. These are these big ladders that go off the side of the ship. They're anywhere from 20 to 60 feet long. And so the event was focused on, not on controlled work packages, but controlled work packages for ACOM, for accommodation ladders. For one of 7, it was actually 7 of the different classes of ships. There were some miscellaneous types of boats and ships that have ladders as well, but we're saying we're just looking at these 7 classes of ships. And so then what we did, so that was kind of our value stream, was controlled work package. Specific conditions were ACOM ladders for the 7 different classes of ships. Okay, because you'd have a controlled work package for a machine gun or a valve or something like that. Nope, we're just looking at ladders. Okay, now we talk about where does this thing start? And this is interesting because first they did a value stream map, and the whole thing starts out at sea when the ship calls in and they say, hey, we've got this thing, it's up for scheduled maintenance. We're going to be in port in 6 weeks or whatever it is. We need to get this stuff rolling. So then that's the request. And then what happens when the ship comes into port, they pull the ladder off the ship, they bring it into a shop, they clean it, they do an assessment, they turn the assessment into the planning and engineering group. the planning and engineering group puts together this CWP, the controlled work package. And so these are all different blocks on a value stream map, right? And then out of planning and engineering comes the package. That goes to the shop. The guys do the work. They test it. They put it on the ship. And then they test it again. And it's good to go. And they release it signed off. So on a value stream map, it was something like really 8 or 9 big blocks. And if you look at that total lead time, it was 70 to 80 days. And SWARMAC, the maintenance center, responsibility is to make sure ships are ready to deploy. Right? That's what they're there for. So, 70 to 80 days to turn around a ladder on a ship doesn't really sound like ready to deploy. And they were looking at what their upcoming workload was, and it was like, we got a lot of ships coming in, we've got to turn them a lot faster. And I'm not saying that's the only reason the ships would come in, but this was one of the longest lead time items. So they said, okay, so that's what we're looking at, the big value stream. And out of that value stream map and the value stream plan, they came up with, okay, for ladders, we need to try to get this down. I'm trying to remember. I think they're trying to get it down to 40 days. 28 days of it was the controlled work package, and there's something like 20 days that was the actual modification or the overhaul of the ladder. So they had Kaizen events out on the floor, and they had Kaizen events for the CWP. And so what they said was, okay, what's the trigger for this event? The trigger was, I've got an assessment report. We're not looking at the whole value stream from the time the assessment report's done until the CWP is completed and released. That's where the focus of the event was, and that was our 27, 28 days, whatever that was. Okay? Boundaries and limitations. This could be the most important part about pulling these events together. You guys over here mentioned about IT systems. So I'll typically put in a boundary and limitation, use existing IT systems. Minor coding changes only if you've got a resource that can do minor coding changes. We'll put budgets there. With the Navy one, they've got a thing called a GIFM. There's more acronyms at the Navy than you could shake a stick at, okay? But there's the GIFM, there's big Navy, there's federal laws. Okay, has to work with, or the new process has to work within the constraints of those things. There were budgets constraints, and there were implementation timeline constraints. We shoot for the 3 days, or however long, we did that in 3 days, and there was a 30-day list. It was real short. There were about 7 or 8 items that didn't get done during the event that had to be done after, and they followed up and executed on those. But this is the event. Okay, so this is setting the team up for success. So we'll put together this charter. Why are we doing the charter? This is where we talk about the big long turnaround times and increased load coming in. Specific goals, okay, we want to get, the team was trying to get that turnaround time on the package they were trying to get it down to 5 days or something. They got it down to 2, which was just amazing. That was their big goal, okay? So what we'll do is 6 weeks or whatever it is ahead of time, we'll pull that charter together, and then we start campaigning, if you will, selling to all the different functional leads, functional managers. So we're putting this thing together. We go into the head quality guy on the base, and we say we're going to do this, and he says, no way. You can't do this. And the commander said, we're doing it. And he was fighting. I mean, this doesn't really, just because the commander says we're going to do it doesn't mean, and if the quality guy says no or not, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. Because you got to get his buy-in. And so there's a lot of long conversations because we tried to figure out why do you think this isn't a good idea? And he said, it's my butt on the line. You guys are going to, the risk or the potential that you guys put in place something that's non-compliant with federal law is significant. And you guys can't do it. But they did. So how did they do it? I already told you the answer to this. Yeah, it wasn't him, but it was his right-hand man, was on the team, and he was in the room full time. Now, at the end of each day, we did something called a debrief, where we had the commander and the different functional leads and the head quality guy come into the room, and we spent about half an hour, 45 minutes saying, this is where we're at, this is what we, at the end of day one is, this is what we've discovered. These are the issues. And then at the end of day two, it's more or less, this is what the layout was. At the end of day two, we were talking about these are the things that we're contemplating. This is the direction that we're going. And the role of the leadership folks that were in the room was not to say, no, you can't do that. The role of them was to, if they were concerned that we weren't compliant, if we weren't doing something right, their role was to say, how are you going to comply with this regulation, or how are you going to comply with this requirement? And if the team had an answer for it, great. This is how we're going to do it. And if the team hadn't thought about it, then they said, well, good thing we're doing this at the end of day one. We still got 2 days to figure it out. And it worked. It was a screaming success in an incredibly bureaucratic, old school, hard culture type environment. I see your hat back there. U.S. Navy retired. Am I describing things that... But they did it, which is really cool. And we went in, and the engineers and the planners were really... I mean, this was a room. Like, everybody sat like this. And it took about a day, day and a half for people to, like, open up their bodies and start talking. And you guys talked earlier about storm, form, norm, and perform. I mean, we definitely had those discrete steps through there. So I got 8 hours more of stuff to talk about. But I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. What I wanted to do was really, you got a bunch of notes in there, but what I really wanted to do was, for those of you who aren't familiar with what Kaizen events are, give you a little bit of orientation to what they are. For those of you who have done this stuff out in the shop floor, show you that, yeah, we can do this in other areas. And for those of you who, what was I going to say? Or give you some insights as to what some of the things are that we need to do to set these events up for success. So maybe you've picked up 10%. Maybe you've got some new maybes, maybe some new beliefs. You don't learn this stuff until you go out and do it. So if you're hesitant to do it, just go out and do it. Start easy, pick a small process, make sure that you've got some champions or people in those different functions or silos that'll support you. And think about the video where they tried it out with cardboard. Okay? So start easy. Pick something that's going to be, it's not going to have this incredible impact across the whole organization if your organization isn't used to this stuff. So go out there, experiment, and learn. Hope you guys picked up 1 or 2 little nuggets today. There's a whole bunch of more nuggets the rest of the morning and into this afternoon. And thanks for having me here.